I wanted to talk today about two different approaches to macronutrients. There's a comprehensive approach, which is probably one that most of you are familiar with, where you just log everything, get the numbers to add up to your totals. And then there's also a segmented, or what I might call a partitioned approach to macronutrients, which is a little bit different. So ultimately, which one you use depends on either your preference or what your coach tells you to do. So I favor comprehensive for obvious reasons that will become obvious in this video. But segmented or partitioned macros, they are fairly common, and I think they are also favored more often than not by coaches that tend to follow a little bit more of a cookie cutter approach to providing macros or dietary instructions. So the idea behind segmented or partitioned macros is that you are given a list of numbers per meal, usually saying like meal one is 30, 20, 10, protein, carbs, fats. And you'll see everything moves in very large ranges. Like the fats will go from 10 down to 0. The carbs will go from 20 to 0 or double up to 40. The protein, in almost all cases that I've seen, stays consistent. It's either at 30, 45, or whatever for every single meal, which nothing wrong with that. And then along with that, there's a list of approved foods. And so it says, okay, for 30 grams protein, here are the list of approved foods and amounts. So at first blush, it seems like, hey, this is kind of convenient. It takes some of the guesswork out of me. I can just pick something from column A, something from column B, and something from column C and put a meal together, which is true. You can do that. The issue becomes where, first of all, there's a couple things. You're only working off of that list of approved foods. So if it's not on there, it's not okay. So even though you're following a macronutrient-based diet, you still have certain foods that are just off limits. And actually most foods realistically are probably off limits, just things that are on the approved foods list. The reason this is usually an indication of a cookie cutter approach also is because oftentimes those, the macros are given in conjunction with the list of foods, which is just a cut and paste document that never changes. Like, 30 grams of protein is 4 ounces of this, 4 ounces of this, 5 ounces of this, 1 cup of this, blah, 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 blah. Which just is an indication that like those figures probably aren't going to change. They're consistent for every meal, and it's done to kind of facilitate a cut and paste approach to coaching. So that's one reason I'm not a big fan of it. The bigger reason, however, is because it completely and totally discounts the concept of trace macros, meaning you have a protein source. It may have some carbs in it, probably not, but some. It will have some trace fats in it. And a segmented or partitioned macronutrient plan will advise you to only count the protein in a protein source, only count the carbs in a carb source, only count the fats in a fat source, which again can be super convenient. It's also a gross oversimplification. So what I've done here is taken some notes on a few common food sources here. And these are things that would typically be allowed under a segmented macro plan. So for carb sources, let's just say our carb total for the day, if we add up all the meals, is 200 grams. And you elect, and I'm going to use extremes here, you elect to go with something like white rice for all of your carbs for that day. So along with that, you're going to get 21 trace grams of protein, 7 grams of trace fat that just completely don't get counted at all. That's from your carb source alone. So that's an extra, 140 calories, something like that. So one thing that you'll notice oftentimes if you look at some of the plans from these coaches that provide these is your caloric total, realistically it should be, I don't know if it always is, but it should be a little bit lower because there's an assumption that certain trace macros are coming in that we're not accounting for. And so if you were going to say, if I was going to write a meal plan for somebody that was at 1,400 calories, using a segmented macro approach, I might write that at 12 or 1250, knowing that there's going to be some amount of trace calories and macros that come in from some of these approved foods. The problem with that, as you'll see here, is I don't know what those numbers are. And they can vary from almost nothing to a ton. And that's a problem. So bodybuilding is all about precision, and this throws precision out the window completely. So with rice, it's 21 protein, 7 fat. With cream of rice, it's 15 extra grams of protein, 2 grams of fat. So suddenly, if you go from using rice to using cream of rice for everything, your caloric intake is going to come down a good bit. If you do potato, that's 17 grams of protein, no fat at all. If you go with rice cakes, I'm talking about standard, like lightly salted rice cakes, not a flavor or anything like that. To get 200 grams of carbs, you're going to bring in about 25 to 28 grams of protein and about 25 grams of fat added on there because each one of those rice cakes is 1 and 1 in that column and it adds up fast if you use them all day long. And for oats, another carb source that is often on the approved list, to get 200 grams, if you use them for every meal, you're bringing in an extra 40 grams of protein, extra 20 grams of fat. Just off the top of my head, that is about an extra 300 and something calories. So that's a lot. And so that is a huge variance. If I'm providing a meal plan for somebody, say, here's your carb sources, pick them. It could be anywhere from like an extra 60 calories, 60 to 70 calories, up to an extra 300 and something. So trace macros matter. Let's look at a couple of fat sources here. If your fat target for the day is 50 grams and you wanted to do all of those fats from oil, cool. Zero protein, zero carbs. Oils are just pure fat. Now let's say you want to do that from peanut butter instead. So that's going to be, I'm sorry, zero protein, zero carb, I think is what I said. That's what I meant to say. If you're going to do peanut butter instead, also something that's on the approved list, much higher in trace macros. To get 50 grams of fat, you're going to be bringing in 24 grams of protein, 19 grams of carbs. So again, that's about an extra 200-ish calories there. So the problem with segmented or partitioned macros, in addition to the fact that it is a good red flag indicator that you're getting a cookie cutter approach that probably isn't going to change very much at all, the bigger issue is just the amount of variability, fluctuation, and the complete and total lack of precision that comes from not tracking these trace macros. So the way I favor it, and really the only way to do macros correctly in my book, is to use a comprehensive approach where you use an app like MyFitnessPal to track everything, and it will automatically log, in your protein sources, your protein, but also any trace carbs and any trace fats that come along with that. So you're given daily totals, and the way that I do it is I will provide guidelines per meal. I'll say, get your protein intake pretty evenly distributed throughout the day. Favor your carbs more heavily during these times. We're looking for about this many pre and post. Scatter the rest around as you see fit. Fats I usually don't care about. You can throw a big bomb of fats in at one meal. You can evenly distribute those. It doesn't matter too much. But as long as you're following a comprehensive approach where everything is tracked, you're going to be in much better shape than if you go with a segmented or partitioned route.